Hello, everybody. I'm your host, Zenitsu, and you're listening to the Digi Talks podcast, the show that covers various topics from news to meta developments and everything in between for the fine folks who love the Digimon trading card game. Just as a quick reminder, I do stream this live over on twitch.tv/Zenitsu, and it's also uploaded under the YouTube channel of Zenitsu for your viewing pleasure, as well as being on various different podcasting platforms like Spotify, so you have multiple different ways to be able to enjoy. Today, I'm with my co-host Teddy, and we're going to be talking about deck building. More specifically, the difference between archetypes, tribal, and colors and mechanics, and their overall impact on the design of the game and deck building in general. So before we get into that big topic, we do have the Play TCG September Ultimate Cup to talk about. And I'm just going to spoil it right now. There is really nothing new that has developed. The Ultimate Cup is just whatever it is, and it doesn't look like things are really changing a whole lot. There's no new special or spicy tech that's being adopted. The last big change was Mario's upset with D-Reaper being a really smart meta call, and we see somebody else found that same level of success, which that's not really a surprise considering the rest of the top 16 breakdown. So first place was a Black War Greymon X build. We already know that the build adapts two different styles of cards. It adapts the DNA with the Flame Dramon, and it adapts the Dorpikmon to be able to cross because a lot of your cards are also dinosaurs. So that just seems the de facto way to be able to play Black War Greymon or War Greymon in Ultimate Cup, just as a good alternative win condition because your Digimon are still very hard to deal with. Then we have second place with Mirage, third with Mirage, fourth with All Force, fifth with D-Reapers, sixth with Red Hybrids, seventh with Mirage, eighth with Beelzemon X, ninth with Belphemon, 10th with All Force, 11th with Red Hybrids, 12th with Bloom, 13th with Red Hybrids, 14th Red Hybrids, 15th also Red Hybrids, and 16th All Force. So these are just some of the better mono-colored decks, with D-Reaper being the only actual exception because it's more of a meta read, just because purple and blue are pretty strong. And I think the Red Hybrids came out in force, partially because maybe there was more D-Reapers. Hard to say without the full breakdown, but yeah, these are just some of the best mono-color decks, and that is Ultimate Cup. Not really anything new or spicy to add or change to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's still the same. I mean, there is a wide variety, but it's still roughly the same number as before, so it's not anything crazy. I mean,
Yeah, 8 different playable decks, which is fine. I would say it's a okay format. I think just a lot of people are kind of tired of it, and we see that in actually the attendance record. The attendance for this event, for being a big premier online event with some of the better pricing distributed throughout the whole year, there was only 288 players. I know that might sound like a lot, considering some regions don't get that number, but that is basically a reduction of probably almost a third of the players. Just did not really care about this format. I could have signed up last minute if I wanted to, and I just didn't because, again, I just didn't care. I think people are just burnt out on this. It's not fun. It's not exciting. It's not really freshening up the experience that we thought it was at the beginning, and now it's just kind of dragging.
yeah, we're kind of to the point where Ultimate Cups we need to be changed into something else, or
That's why I
uh,
liked them as like just normal format. I think like between my own personal testing and like just looking at the decline in attendance for the big online events, there's multiple other factors that go into that decline. I'm not saying the game is dying or anything. I'm just saying people's interest are being lost because it's kind of monotonous. And I think people just more care about the main game rather than this fun little side experiment. And yeah, like they're
I
gonna
mean,
do
people are
something
just checked
different.
out, man.
Yeah,
People are
I
ready for something new.
They're
Simple as
they're
that.
gonna they're probably gonna change it again next year because Ultimate Cup has been different almost every single year. So I don't know what they're gonna do, but they're gonna do something. So we can only wait and see on that. As far as before we get into the big topic, news point number two. We have confirmation that Nationals is actually going to be EX5. EX5 releases 1 week right before Nationals, so make sure to practice that format, which that's the current format that Japan is in, and make sure you're able to get your cards before you go on that big expensive trip to Nationals if you're traveling or if you're a California local. The nice quiet drive up there or down there
Right.
technically, whichever
Can't
direction because it's in the middle of California.
can't wait to make that flight. That's gonna be fun. Across
Yeah.
the country.
Just as a side note,
Man.
do you get your cases like day one?
I usually do, yeah. I try to.
Okay, I might need to get the hookup from you. Um, just because I'm not really looking at building anything with the secret rares, so I don't care about EX5 secret rares. Um, So I would, if you're planning on going, give me the little hookup there on
Of course.
some supplies because I'm probably not going to be buying a case, and whatever I would be buying probably won't make it in time.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'll probably end up just most likely bringing it up with me
Yeah,
and just bring whatever I have for that
cause
because I'm just gonna bring a big container with all the cards.
cause before. I was just planning on bringing a BT14 deck that really doesn't need any EX5 cards, or if I did, like EX5 to a minimum degree, which I think is just a smart plan in general in case you don't have the ability to get EX5 in time. Just play a BT14 deck and you should still be mostly fine. I know right now this is looking a little bit too far ahead into the future, but right now it looks like one of the better decks to come out in EX5 actually is an EX5 deck with Anubismon. That deck right now in Japan is making waves, but there's still plenty of other really strong playable decks that just are still there. Like Lugimon, Shine Greymon is still good. Metal Garurumon's coming back, but that's mostly because of EX5. So there's still stuff you could play competitively that you don't need a whole lot of EX5 for.
Yeah, it's gonna be okay. It'll be alright.
But speaking of prepping for nationals and building decks, now actually on to the big topic of the night, which is deck building. So I was perusing the interwebs as I do, and I came across a couple of posts that basically lamented on how deck building has gotten really boring for Digimon. And I think this goes with the design changes that Digimon has had over the years. The very first year, if anyone remembers, um, like sets 1 through 5, they were more about colors and mechanics. There wasn't really any like hardcore name based or trait based synergies. There was the start of it, and they really started honing in on that probably around, I would actually say, EX2. They really started to hone in on it. They were like leaning towards it with BT6 through BT8, but they really like hammered it in on EX2 in terms of like name based synergies more specifically. Then during Black 1, which was sets 7. Was it 7? Yes. It was,
It was 7, yes.
yeah, sets like 6 or 7 through 9. They started leaning into it a little bit more the more that block progressed. And then once we got into block 2, which was sets 2 through 13, that's when archetypes really were more prominent. And I think that, yes, it does make deck building more boring because they build the decks for you. You still have some creative flexibility and freedom based on some of the other factors. So, the way I like to think of deck building in Digimon is we have basically 3 levels. The base level is the biggest one. It's almost like a pyramid in a sense. The base level is the biggest one. That's going to be your colors and mechanics. So the more your deck is about colors and mechanics, the more freedom you have in what you're able to do. Then going up a level to level 2, you have trait based synergies. So that's where Bloomlord and Machine Dramon are currently at, because they don't really care about what specific cyborg or plant fairy vegetation you're using. They just care about the trait itself. So as long as you get more plants, fairies, and vegetations, that increases the amount of possible cards that you have to work with to be able to customize the deck or spawn multiple different decks from, as we're currently seeing with those decks more specifically. And I think like that's probably the sweet spot that Digimon kind of needs to be in, is more trait based. But right now we're doing a lot of more archetype based, where archetype by definition is name based synergies. So you need to have a specific name to interact with a card, just in general. So that right now is your Greymons and Garurumons. They do not care about anything else other than Greymons and Garurumons. And I
At the
think,
current moment.
yes, and that being the tippity top of the pyramid means that it has the most narrow design, and that's currently where the majority of the game is just in that most, like the most narrow zone that we have. So like I'm not saying like deck building is bad because of that. We do have a lot of stuff that is trait based, but we don't have enough of that trait to really make a diverse list, like red hybrids as an example. The most optimal red hybrid list is going to be 46 of the exact same card combination with only 4 cards of, well, wiggle room to actually work with in order to have the most optimal build. Those 4 cards is going to be your tech or flex spots to do whatever you want with. But if we had more red hybrids, then we could try to diversify what the deck is able to do. But because we don't, it's literally just super one note. And that's where Hunters is, that's where Cross currently is, that's where Blue Flare is. So if these were expanded on a little bit more, we actually would start being able to have different builds. And Cross kind of had that with Mervamon, where you had the Mervamon build or you had the Shout 7 build, and then Shout 7 just was the better build, so people just put down Merva and just played Shout 7. So,
Exactly.
like, but it goes to show that trait-based synergies allows you to have more flexibility than name-based synergies.
Yeah, it's weird, but I mean it makes sense because your the trait's going to be more vague or wide, I should say, in terms of what Digimon are where, whereas you can only have the singular name, so or at least they'll share like a name throughout their kin, but not like even then sometimes like some of the stuff doesn't even work together. Like it's really weird. I don't I think they're shooting themselves in the foot by going with this name-based energy, and then they're gonna shoehorn themselves to where like decks like, for example, in like an EX5, we have like the Grace Nova stuff, which is cool because then that means further on they can add more to it, because none of them are looking for specific names. They're looking for the traits of whatever, what's it, Night Claw and Night Fang, and then of course Galaxy, but there's only one Galaxy, so it's going to be Grace Nova. But that makes it so that you don't have to worry if they do end up making other Digimon that have Galaxy and trait. I don't know what other Digimon would be, but maybe, who knows. Then now you have another way to find them via the deck itself. So it just makes it better for when cards get like that. We're gonna have more cards, so more and more cards get added. You have more ways to play around the deck that you want to build, rather than okay, I'm playing Greymon. Well, I can only really use the cards that specify Greymon because that's where all my Evo cost gets reduced. That's where all my effects get triggered. That's where, or I guess Greymon and Omnimon because they gotta lump them together. But it's it's just tedious. It makes it very dull to build, And like he said, it just makes it so it's very one dimensional. And when you're playing a card game, you don't want to be one dimensional because then it just gets to the point where if like I could look at these lists from this recent Ultimate Cup and I guarantee like 90% of the decks, like if they're like multiples, they're gonna look the exact same. Like these Mirage Galgamon decks, I guarantee they're gonna look fairly similar, and there might be like 2 or 3 cards that are ever so slightly different, and then that's gonna be your freedom of expression, and that's really lame if that's your freedom of expression. 3, 4 cards,
Yeah,
like that's
because with
so dumb.
Gauss, yeah, because with Gauss specifically, like a lot of these archetypes, like Gao is actually an
Let's
archetype
see,
because it is looking for
four,
cards with
four,
Gao in its
four,
name.
four, four.
Like your build mostly builds itself. You play all of the cards that say Gao that are recent and
Yeah,
good, and then you're done. Like that is kind of it. And sure, granted, like with Greymon, the more you expand upon a name, the more options that you have to play around with it, but it's not as open as with traits more specifically. And I'm not saying they need to make everything more tribal, because there
oh
was this
yeah,
big misconception between what an archetype is and what tribal is. And I think we just, at this point, because a lot of tribals are currently one note because they're not widely supported, because they had 1 or 2 waves of support to make the deck, and then that's it. Um, like we kind of infused tribal with archetype, and they are different, and it's very important to understand the difference, because from a design perspective, that is worlds apart in terms of what you're able to do. So like I was looking at the new Metal Garurumon stuff, just as an example. That would be more of an archetype because, well, I just am going to use the starter deck stuff, and then I'm going to use the EX5 stuff. And then the deck is mostly done right there. Granted, I do have all of the old Melga stuff from BT9 and BT5 and the promos, but some of those older cards don't really have the best interactions with some of the newer ones. So if you're just looking to get like a base build going just to be simple and effective, you're just going to be using the starter deck in EX5 and then just hit the go button, and your deck is pretty much done for you. Shine was that way, except he didn't have a starter deck. You just had the 3 sets that had Shine based cards, and the deck literally just built itself. There's not a whole lot of actual creative expression or freedom in terms of what that deck can do. There is a little bit, but not a whole lot, just because there are some cards that work with Vaccine, and Shine is also a Vaccine. So there's that.
yeah. I don't know how they're gonna go about it because I don't mind when they do these like, for example, like the Garurumon deck. Like I think the deck is cool and it looks super fun to play. Um, but I kind of don't want them to be like, oh, because now that deck is absolutely insane. By the way, I don't know if you've seen like combos and shit like that they can do. Like if you've watched any gameplay at all with that deck, it is absurd what that deck can do now. Um, if it wasn't already good before, now it's beyond absurd. But um, aside from power level, um, I wish that they would have been more unique with it because, like, essentially all it's doing is the same thing it was doing before. Like, when they go in to make these archetypes, I wish they were more unique, like dramatically unique. Like when you see, this is probably not the greatest example, but like I think of like War Greymon and Black War Greymon. They're 2 sides of the same coin, but they do dramatically different things. One focuses more on defense and chipping. One is just hitting hard as hell one time. But they're the same archetype for the most part. It's just the top end changes, and then once that you get to that like level 5 above, that's when you're like, okay, now my deck does something dramatically different than the other deck that you would see. And then then there's the bleed in where people lump them together and mix and match. But for the most part, when you get to the top end, they're very dramatically different. So I wish that the the Garurumon stuff, or hopefully, just not even necessarily just the Garurumon stuff, but if they go further down the line, like for example, Gallantmon and things like that, I wish they would be more unique with the effects that they give, or um, find ways to make them more interesting to just use because
I mean,
like
Galamon's changed a lot, to be fair.
but at the
Because
end of the day it
you
still
have
does the
DP.
same exact thing it does.
I mean,
It
you
never
have
it hasn't
deletion.
changed.
I mean, you have deletion. In terms of what Galamon could do, and then you also have raid. So like the two kind of just play a little bit differently. Like yeah, the end result is kind of the same where you swing, something is getting deleted and then damage is being dealt. But that's 90% of Digimon decks in a nutshell. Boiled down to like that binary level. So they are trying to figure out different ways to be able to approach that. But most of the time when they do, it's just creating a whole new line, and then that whole new line tries to spawn a whole new deck rather than try to have the availability to be able to commingle with what already exists.
Yeah, that's where I guess I'm having that trouble because like I mean I love Gallantmon, but God, dude, it just
Because he went from
there's
like, let me just stack the ability to increase my range in which I'm able to delete, to now I'm just going to start milling you. And I'm going to be
yeah, now
milling
I'm gonna
me.
mill you and then chip here and there, trash security and swing at a big body here and there,
So
and then just
he
mill
had a
you out.
dramatic playstyle difference with how the new stuff plays in comparison to the old stuff.
And the old stuff wasn't the worst, but it was not good because it required your opponent to do stuff, and then you didn't want that. You don't want your opponent to be ahead and then you clap back to beat them. Like that's just not it's not a good conducive playstyle to win. And then they switch it now to where yes, I do think this style now is better. I don't think it is. I know it is. Just being able to mill forcibly get to your win condition faster without having to wait for your opponent, which is infinitely better. But now you lose out on what Galamon was before. Not necessarily in this case, it's not a bad thing because it's much better. It's infinitely better than what it was. But I don't know. I just think the deck doesn't is not what it used to be, and I'm okay that it's not that way. But I don't want the uniqueness of what it was doing before, just constantly controlling, having this unfathomable control of the board. And then now you kind of have to forego that because that doesn't work, because the game of Digimon doesn't facilitate that. Like, they have to be very specific metas for that to even be relevant. And it's never, there has not been a meta where that's relevant. Just being able to widely nuke a million bodies on the board. And if you were to do that, why would you not just use DeathX? DeathX does the same shit except it's better. So it's like it's like
But there's still some creative things to be able to have based on some of the tools that you have, because this kind of brings us into like a little subcategory in deck building, which is packages. So if anyone's
Mhm.
unfamiliar with what a package is, basically it's a group of cards that want to interact with each other, and then that's kind of it. Like it doesn't necessarily need the rest of, like, it doesn't need a dedicated full evolutionary line to be useful. It is just a small grouping of cards that just have good synergy with each other, that mechanically work with what the deck is trying to do. We've seen this with Millith as just an example,
Mhm.
where it's using the Guilmon low end to be able to try to mill the opponent, and then it goes into Lilithmon, which nobody would have even thought of if it wasn't for Japan doing it. Um, to be able to start like bringing home and reusing options and doing various other things, because the mill engine that the Guilmon provides allows you to get yourself into a particular state to be able to make your cards as effective as possible, even though you're not actually trying to use a Gallantmon at the end of the day. Now, there's a whole bunch of little sub packages in Digimon that we like to adopt, literally like one or two card draw engines, or just a full low level evolutionary line, just because they work very well with each other. And then the top end doesn't matter, because usually when you're playing like an agnostic top end, It just doesn't care about what the rest of the deck is doing. It cares about its own little package and what it's trying to do mechanically.
Yeah, I, I, that's a good explanation for it. It definitely, we definitely are leaning into that. Where like you have, like you said, those small individual packages here and there that people use. Like for example, like Belphamon, how they use the Eismon little package where it just draw two draw or draw three trash two like that, so you can get your cards in trash and that. Where I mean, purple uses that in general. Period. To be honest, I wouldn't say just Belphamon, but just to harp on that point, the packages being unique in that regard. But the only gripe I have with that is that, like, for the most part, there are packages that are just so absurdly better than the most of them that, like, you can't really be creative. Like purple, you can be like, oh, there's some cool stuff in purple. It's like there kind of is, but like, why would you use anything other than the Eismon stuff? Like, like that stuff is so beyond absurd compared to like all the other draw engines in purple that it's like, why would I ever look at any other cards from purple excluding the Eismon plus the Gabumon and then Demi-Maramon? Like
Well,
what? What other package would even become supplemental even close to it? And I
well,
feel like they just
purple
don't know how to make it good.
Well, purple as a whole is in a unique position compared to every other color in the entire game because it actually has the least amount of tribals and it has the least amount of archetypes. It is the color that is more focused on mechanics. So the way I like to look at purple is it wants cards in your trash. So there's a couple of different ways to get cards in your trash. Put them on the field in your trash, put them from your hand in the trash, or put them from your deck into the trash. So that's where the whole self-sacrifice, delete my Digimon to do X, the whole discard, I need to draw and then discard to filter and cycle to fill up the trash that way, and then just the raw mill, where it's just like, yeah, I'm just needing to mill 3, mill 4, mill 5, mill whatever amount. Like that's just purple shtick. And because there's so many different ways to approach those based on what decks are currently being supported, that's where mixing and matching kind of just makes things really interesting because it has the freedom to be able to mix and match. So like Eismon is a very perfect example where it's like, okay, yes, it wants to interact with drawing and discarding, so you want to pair it up with decks that want to care about discarding cards. But it also wants to be deleted, so you could also put that in decks that just want to delete your own stuff for extra benefits. So it fits into multiple different categories as an individual card, having more creative flexibility, which is why people gear towards that type of stuff a little bit more, is because of how much cross synergy and cross support it has based on the mechanics it's playing around with. And like I said, purple is in the unique position where it does this the best, and that's why a lot of deck builders love playing purple and love the color purple, is because based on that pyramid that I explained earlier, it being at the lowest level has the most creative freedom in order to do what you want. So like the Gizumon package, people have found, oh, the Gizumon package works with Anubismon because Anubismon likes bringing stuff out of the trash. Gizumon likes putting stuff into the trash and bringing it out. So like you could see like there's some really unique and interesting synergies that people can find out of nowhere.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's exactly.
Because
That's pretty much
Beelstar,
on the spot.
yeah, because Beelstar being another purple deck, it does care about Three Musketeers, but it realistically doesn't. You're just using it for the different options that she can work with. And right now, people are playing her with the Gizumon stuff because, again, like you said, it's just one of the better cycling engines in, like, current color of purple. It was using the Eismon stuff before, but Gizumon, for whatever reason, just works a little bit more efficiently, just because Beelstar
It's more
doesn't care.
aggressive.
Yeah, it's more aggressive, and Beelstar just does not care about whatever the low end is. And then when we get the Gabumon stuff, Beelstar wants to, again, then shift gears and is able to tech in the Gabumon stuff because, again, it's good cycling to be able to get it to where it needs to be. And
Gives it an alternate win condition
yeah, it
with
gives it
not
an
having to
alternate
worry
wish
about
condition,
just
and
Bellstarmon.
Yeah, so you have a little bit more creative freedom and flexibility when you get certain packages like that that just they don't care about what the individual cards are. It just cares about setting its win condition up as effectively as possible, and the wider spectrum of cards that you have to work with, the more creative freedom and flexibility you have. So a lot of other colors, unfortunately, aren't in such a good position, and the majority of them are kind of shoehorned into archetypes and tribals. Red and black are probably the two most egregious of this, where literally almost everything from the beginning has been kind of archetype, tribal, or bust.
Yeah, it's. I think yeah, you definitely lean there. Red is really bad with that. Black has also definitely gotten a lot worse over the years of it. Like it wasn't so bad in the beginning, but then as like probably around like what
It was probably
five,
BT6. Yeah,
six,
BT5,
yeah, five,
BT6 was when
six,
Reds really started to hone it in, which was earlier than a lot of the other decks and a lot of the other colors. Because you look at
yeah,
like
Greymon,
BT6.
Gurmon.
Yeah, because you
They
look at
got
like
two.
BT6 and like outside of blue Metal Garurumon, it really didn't have any like archetypes it was trying to build towards. It was more mechanics based. And then obviously the best one was Bond of Friendship. Um,
Yeah,
Bond of Friendship really started honing in on the fact that like, oh, it just wants to be archetypical in terms of what it can do and what it's trying to do, just because Bond of Friendship cared about Gabumons and Garurumons, and Gabumons cared about Garurumons, and it naturally just geared towards that direction.
interesting.
But I
Hmm.
think like in Block 3, they are trying to take it down a notch and go down a level from being more archetype focused to trying to be a little bit more tribal focused, because we see stuff in BT14 that is more focused around like different traits. Like that's why Bloomlord has existed since BT10 and is still existing even all the way in BT15 in Japan, because as long as they just print more plants, fairies, and vegetations, that's always something for it to try to adapt and use. And whether it fits on theme or not is to be determined, because you have two different plant and fairy decks, one being Bloomlord, the other being Rose, but they
They're
share
both
that
the
common
same now.
ground of that trait.
Yeah, they're basically the same deck, just top end changes ever so slightly.
I mean, that's the same as Greymon is right now,
Exactly.
but but Greymon is that way because it's the most supported archetype. So once things get more and more support, things open up a little bit more. And I think even though
That
we
is the
are,
hope.
yes, even though we are entering what the third or fourth year of Digimon, it's still a
Fourth.
relatively young game, and our card pool is not like the big three, where there's just
No.
thousands upon thousands of cards. I think like we only have like maybe around 2 to 3,000 cards to work with, and you could already cut half of them for just being filler trash.
I was about to say, yeah, probably
So
like
we
60% of
realistically
them are
only have
useless.
like maybe 1,000 competitive cards out of the entire like history of the game to work with right now, and limit that even further due to traits and archetypes. And like you could start to see like there actually isn't a whole lot for us to actually play around with, because the game hasn't been around that long.
I mean, yeah, we're just getting the fourth year. I mean, come on. There's like nothing. This is such a drop in the pond compared to other card games. So I think we just need to give it some time. Hopefully, they've done a good job so far. I I can't see why they wouldn't do continue to do well, and they've started leaning towards fixing those things. So I'm happy with it, uh, and I can't wait to see more. Honestly,
Yeah, but I think deck building isn't necessarily as boring as people think it is. Because I still see, I don't know how to build my deck, and they're talking about some of the most simplest decks to build. And granted, these are newer players, so they don't have access to all of the resources to be able to get those answers themselves, which is a problem in of itself. Part of it is their own laziness. Part of it is Like they just don't know where to go. So that's why they ask those questions. But the fact that we still see people struggling with deck building, I guess, is like a good thing, considering it isn't as hyperlinear as some people might think, because some people like you and me in the competitive spectrum will be like, yes, this is a no-brainer, you play this and that is it. um and that's why like deck profile videos are kind of like right now, because the decks do kind of build themselves, but they also don't, because you have those casual people still asking those questions, which again isn't necessarily a bad thing. It just shows that there's interest and they're wanting to learn and they haven't figured it out yet.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's why Bandai's leaning towards this type of design, because people are asking those questions to try to make it as easy on them as they humanly possibly can. And this goes into like the design of the game and where the current state of the game is at, because I think they do a pretty good job at being able to ease people into the game, because they've adopted more of a block structure for deck building, where it's just like, okay, I'll use cross arts as an example because that's like the best example. Started out in block 2 as the premier deck, got an update in BT11, and then got another update in BT12. It got less and less of an update, sure, as the deck's life went on, but it still got updates. So if you invested initially in it, it didn't take a whole lot to continue your investment. And if you're willing to pick it up, then BT10 should have still been in plentiful supply for you to buy to get whatever you need if you're not buying singles and you're just looking from a pack opening perspective.
I hard agree. Couldn't have said it any better.
Because I also see a lot of new people asking, when should I jump in? Is this a good time to jump in? And I think based on their shifts in design, for how sets are structured and blocks are structured, anytime seems like it's actually the best time. Usually it's easier when there's a starter deck to pair up with it, like the transition that we're having into Block 3 with the Metal Gurumon and War Greymon starter decks. So usually those make the transitions a little bit easier. So the best time is usually the start of a block, but really any time, just because of how cheap the game is, it really isn't going to cost you an arm and a leg to pick up some singles to be able to finish the deck that you want.
And it's also not very hard to pick up competitively viable decks too.
No.
So.
Which is weird, because like there's some decks that are like hyper competitive and they're like dirt cheap, and then you have more casual decks that are actually more expensive. I think that's actually by design, because they want competitive players to be able to get whatever they need super easily. But if you want to be hyper casual and have fun, which is where they know any TCG, the majority of your player base is that casual majority, that's probably why it is so expensive to play some of these like casual decks, is probably because of that, and they knew it.
They ain't stupid. They know that. That's why Galamon's so damn expensive for no reason.
Right. He's a big, splashy, cool-looking Digimon that's just okay enough to play, but if you're thinking about playing competitively, there's definitely better. The only time they really broke that rule was kind of All Force. Like, All Force is just good, and it's expensive just because of the secret rares. So I think that was them maybe testing the waters and playing around with what rarities they want to put specific cards at. Because right now, a lot of the super rares are mega level Digimon, which not all the time you need 4 of. Sometimes you only need 2 or 3 of it. And you could get by just fine, which if there's more that's being opened, there's less that you need, therefore price goes down. Which is why in Block 3, we are seeing the rise of super rares being in lower levels, like level 3s as an example, because now you actually need 4 of those cards. So I think maybe that's them also telegraphing rarities a little bit better for deck building because, like, oh, this is a super rare. You should want to have 4 of this card, and you should need to have 4 of this card. I think secret rares, they might have learned to tone it down a little bit. Not saying that they are doing the best job at that, but they are making secret rares usually not the most important card in the entire deck.
Yeah, most of the time.
But yeah, so like even on a rarity perspective, they're still trying to ease players into being able to build decks. And I think like that's partially why they were leaning towards archetype design, is because it is just easier to not only design for, because you just basically are building a deck for the players, which again, that seems really boring. But as we've seen with Greymon, the more it gets supported, then the more that you could possibly do with it. Although people are always going to find the most optimal combination of cards. But that's the same with Tribal. Like, I guess because that's why we lumped them together, is because our Tribals aren't as widely supported as our Archetypes. Because Archetypes need to be less supported and Tribals should be more supported. So that way, in that pyramid that I laid out at the beginning, it goes to show that, like, hey, there is more creative freedom if you go down this level. And I think like that's why certain cards kind of started getting like banned and limited, is because one, they were taking up design space and they couldn't design around specific cards. Like imagine if Metal Garurumon right now for the future in EX5 had the multi-attacking security attack plus draw and all of that other stuff. Like it would be extra nutty. So when they do ban and limit stuff, there is a reason why, and a lot of the stuff that was banned and limited have been more archetype-based design focused. There hasn't really been a whole lot of tribal ones.
Never really thought about that, but yeah, that's true.
It's because they know what the card is supposed to do inside of the deck, and they know the deck is overperforming, therefore they know exactly what to look at. The more that they support an archetype, the harder that becomes, granted, because like at this point in Greymon, what do you hit next? Like if you really wanted to hit Greymon, what is the card to hit next? It's like it's not going to be Black War, because they're just going to use a different Black War. Or if they do hit Black War, they're just going to end up swapping over to War Greymon. If it is a War Greymon, cool, they just revert back to the next best War Greymon. Like it starts to become a cascading problem where a limit wouldn't even matter anymore after a certain point if something becomes too egregious, which is kind of like why we haven't seen anything for Shine, because like what reasonably would you hit in Shine? I think the easiest answer, which they've already figured it out based on Ultimate Cups, is Marcus, but Marcus would probably hinder like the viability of the deck way more than if they were to hit something like, let's just say, Geo Greymon. Because if they hit Geo Greymon, then they could at least revert back to the next best Geo Greymon, which unfortunately is going to be the Security Geo Greymon, which isn't that bad of a card considering the rest of the entire deck is red-yellow, so it kind of just doesn't matter which one it is. You also theoretically could just use the yellow one, but again, that's where it kind of just doesn't matter, where you still have a replacement. Which is why when what's its face not Dex Doru Greymon, Doru Greymon got limited, we didn't really have a good viable replacement, so therefore it felt extra bad on us. But now that we got the replacement, it's not as bad anymore.
I feel like that's not so bad because you could just hit. I think hitting like Rise Greymon from BT13 is probably the better hit if we were to hit anything.
I mean,
I think
I don't
playing
think
the
that's
singular
wrong.
Marcus. I think hitting the singular Marcus is not that, or not the Marcus is not the play because then everything just dies. The whole deck loses.
I mean,
And then you can't even play.
But not trying to get too deep into
Yeah,
like what to ban and limit. It goes to show that it, from a design perspective, it makes it easier for them to look at the deck objectively and pick a card that they want to hit. So even though archetype-based design is kind of boring when there's not a whole lot going on with the archetype, and it is just it does build itself, it does make things easier from a balancing perspective, where now they can specifically look at what's going wrong and why. So there's multiple reasons why we shifted towards this archetype and trait-based design, which I don't necessarily hate. It's just I do think they need to find a good balance to include more of what purple has for every other color. Except I guess the counter argument is every other color isn't as mechanically rich as purple.
I
Uh
was about to say, yeah.
Green has been stuck in a very bad position for a very long time because its mechanics have been literally the weakest in the entire game. And then whatever mechanics it does get basically gets a keyword in a different color. So it's like, okay, cool. Green just was the testing ground for whatever, and green just keeps getting shafted. Yellow is trying to rediscover its mechanical identities. So yellow's not in the greatest position either. But that's kind of where like archetypes at least kind of help bring it back a little bit in terms of like having a playable deck inside of the color. That's not like, oh, this is just part of a two color identity, therefore is it really considered a yellow deck?
Yeah, okay. I mean, that makes sense, yeah.
So it's not like this type of design is all doom and gloom. I think like it's still a relatively smart design. And that's why I think like if they focus less on archetypes and go more into tribals like they have been for what we've seen in the spoilers for Black 3, I think that's definitely a better direction because that allows them to move up and down a little bit more freely in terms of what they want to make an archetype, what they want to make more mechanical, or do they want to stick inside of the tribal stuff. So like Lucamon, as an example, he cares about two different tribes. He cares about dark animals, and he cares about Sons of Chaos. Well, now with BT 15, we got some more Sons of Chaos cards. So now that recontextualizes how we would want to approach utilizing those cards. Now, do we want to build more into dark animals, or do we want to build more into Sons of Chaos? So it adds extra layers of depth when they do that, and I think having these cross synergies is definitely the smartest approach to be able to allow your players to have that creative freedom while sticking inside of certain design constraints in order for internal stuff to work as best as it possibly can. And when I mean internal stuff, not like internal for the deck, internal as in Bandai's corporate structure for how things are ran. So, because when I was designing a game, I had to think really hard about this. And then when I kept seeing those posts, it opened my mind back up to this type of thought process and discussion.
That's such an. That's a very hard thing to do. It requires a lot of game knowledge and all that. It's a very cool thing. That's very interesting. And I mean, I think I don't think we're in a bad spot, so I don't have no real complaints.
No, this goes back to like what we kind of want out of the game. I don't think we had a specific episode on that, like what we want mechanically out of the game, but like I think
No.
that we, or not we, Bandai just needs to support what they have more often instead of just always create and replace. And I think that's what a lot of players' frustrations end up leaning towards is cool, we get new Melga stuff. Is the old Melga stuff relevant? You don't need
No.
any of it? Okay, why? Like, it would be nice if I could have used it. And instead, it's more like very select parts and pieces to act as filler rather than to like actually support the deck in a more meaningful way. And like I've been saying this for a while, like they do just need to go back and support what they have instead of always needing to constantly create new things. And because like imagine if they just go back to, let's just say, Legend Arms, like give Legend Arms more than one card update. Like I hate those. I hate when they do those promo pack things where it's literally a one card update that comes way too late to where the card isn't even relevant, and then half the time the card is actually just not even good. So it's like, why? Like what was the purpose? Like to you're not doing this in a timely manner to where it's mattering. And to the few who it does matter to, they feel shafted.
Yeah, it's actually just alienating a group of people, which I'm sure they don't care, but
No, they
um,
don't.
I'm sure they don't. That's not even on their radar at all. But um, it does suck when you're like that. Like
It's nice that we got the update, but yeah, it does suck when it doesn't come when we need it.
the cards that, yeah, like what is that? Like how long has it been since Moga's been even relevant in the meta? Probably like what, 2 sets about?
Milga has not done anything since
2, 3 sets?
BT11, I want to say. Like, I know for a fact it was
Yeah.
competitive in BT10. I think BT11
Yeah.
was the big downfall of Melga because that's when we got Black War X. So it
Yeah.
hasn't
So
been
it's like
relevant since
2 or 3
BT11.
sets, give or take.
Yes.
Give or take 2 or 3 sets. Two main sets, 2 or 3 main sets. Let me say that. Um, and it's like now we're getting the support, but the support is now, mind you, that support is so absurdly good. It's very, very good. But like, I don't know. I'm just not a fan of like that kind of stuff where it's like it goes forever without any support whatsoever, and then the support that comes out is so absurdly good that
That
it's
it
just
just
like
replaces
overshadows the
everything before.
everything. And
Yeah.
you're like, oh, well, now my deck sucks. And what am I supposed to do with this other stuff? I've like, for example, like let's say they randomly next set they were like, oh, I want to get a new Galamon stuff, and they're like, they release a whole new line for Galamon, and now it's so absurdly good that the rest of the Galamon stuff is gone. If you're dumb like me, who max rarity the fucking Galamon deck, what, now I'm just shit out of luck. I have to replace all of it because the new stuff is so much better. Why would I play with the old stuff? So it's like so dumb. Like, and they do that a lot. That's not something that's like, though, that it doesn't happen. That happens all the time in this game. So it's like, I hope that's not something they continue to do because that would make me very sad.
It's because of the, like, not necessarily saying it in their defense. It's because the state of the game changes every, probably about every 6 months. There is, like, every 6 months to a year there's a dramatic shift to where stuff does need like almost a complete overhaul to be able to be relevant. Like, you look at some of the old stuff and compare it to some of the new stuff. Not saying power creep isn't a thing. It is a thing. It's not
Of course.
as egregious in this game as other games, mind you.
No, not
But
as
it does show that certain things have gone untouched too long to where they need that complete overhaul. And I think that might be the stem of the problem, where if we got a few more incremental upgrades, then they wouldn't need to completely need to overhaul everything every year or every 6 months or every however long it's been. Because, like, look at Legend Arms just as an example. Even though we're getting the promo card in English way too late for it to even be relevant, the next time we see Legend Arms, if we even see it again, it's going to need another complete overhaul compared to what it already was doing. And it already seemed like it was pretty strong. It just needed some extra support to really round out and bring home what the deck was actually trying to do. And instead, they just kind of are abandoning it and just giving up and just redefining it based on where the game state currently is. Um,
That's
but I
okay. They'll
think,
just make another starter deck.
no, I don't think they'll make a starter deck. If I don't know, Legend
I'd
Arms
say
might not have
better
been
not. That'd be
Legend Arms might not
better
have been the best example, but like there have been a lot of different things where it's
Yeah,
just like
I know what you mean.
they just completely start almost brand new. You could use the old stuff, but it's not good enough, and like the old stuff probably is just gonna end up being filler for the most part while we get another wave of support. But like I like how Bandai is approaching set design. It's just like they just need to do a better job at supporting what they already have more than what they are. And I think that's part of the crux in a lot of like the design as a whole, deck building, following archetypes and tribals and mechanical based synergies like that. It all stems from that same problem of they just need to do a better job at not replacing everything, but just updating as the game progresses, because they very clearly understand the power level of their game. And I don't necessarily think the top deck right now is that far off the power spectrum of the top deck a format or two ago. And they seem to have a better understanding on just the power dynamics that they're playing around with. Now, the rock, paper, scissors keeps changing, and that's a completely different topic because of how they're introducing new stuff and what is able to counter the new stuff. So the rock, paper, scissors is changing, which does change what is or isn't meta playable at the time, but that's a completely different topic.
Yeah, I mean that we could go into that for another hour or two if we really wanted to.
But I think as the game progresses, deck building will, yes, get more complex, but I think that if they play their cards right, deck building will stop being such a linear thing. And if they follow certain design philosophies, they could very easily open deck building up to more creative expression and freedom. Because at the end of the day, that's what coming from Magic, the Timmy, Jimmy, and Spike is all about. Timmies are basically your casuals. They just get whatever they can get and throw together whatever they have and call it a day. They're just excited about cool, splashy, and exciting moments to happen. They don't care about the rest. Then you have the Jimmies or Janes or Jennies, whatever name they actually used. It's been such a long time since I've seen that video. But those are your deck builders. Those are the people who care about creative expression for the game. Then you have your spikes where let me just play the most optimal stuff and I just want to do nothing but win all the time. So that's your dynamic on different players. And I feel like they are currently catering towards the spikes and catering towards the Jimmy or Timmies, and they're forgetting about the Jimmies. And I think that as the game grows, we will get that card pool where the Jimmies are going to be more catered towards, as long as they play their cards smart. Again,
Eventually, I'm sure eventually we'll get back to that point where we'll have more creative expression with these decks, and I think that'll also come from just the card pool getting bigger. That will help as well
yeah,
because we're just limited right now. Like what we have 3 lines for Guilmon. That honestly, that's not a lot, or that's really not that much. So it's like we can't. You really can't do anything else with a lot of these other decks because there isn't the cards necessary to do so. So
and
it'll get fixed over time, I'm sure.
yeah, and not to go on another side tangent here, but to kind of go on a little bit of a side tangent. That's why alternate formats haven't really been super popular in Digimon. Like, people keep trying to come up with stuff, and they all kind of just fail. Even Bandai's, as we see with Ultimate Cup attendance dropping, it's kind of failing right now because, again, like you just said, the card pool really isn't there to support it. And we're just trying to push things too early, too quickly, and that's not necessarily for the betterment of the game's health, as we can clearly see with Ultimate Cup. People are already bored, people are already burnt out. They just want to play Digimon the way Digimon was supposed to be played for the most part, because the attendance on regionals has definitely been better. We'll see how the attendance on regionals is going to be with their last announcement, which we talked about last week with the change to nationals. But there's just a lot that we don't know and have yet to experience or be seen. So as much as I have cautiously optimistic faith in Bandai, I'm going to not hold my breath, but I'm going to hope that things can definitely improve. And based on their current trend in terms of their designs, they have been improving. They just need to improve in certain other areas, like getting more TOs, holding more events, having better prizing. But that has nothing to do with the actual design of the game. And I think right now on the market, this is just one of the best designed games, which excites me as a game designer myself.
Yeah, I fail to find another game that is as unique in terms of its mechanics as Digimon is. Um, and I play a bunch of them right now. Right now, the card games I've been playing recently is just this, and then One Piece, and then Vanguard. Those have been the games I've been, and it just those games are like One Piece is fun. I'm really enjoying One Piece. Vanguard was fun. but it's just something about it after I played for a while. Still fun to play, but different, not in the best way. And then Digimon, I always find myself just coming back because it's just the experience is just superior in terms of overall gameplay. Now, there's side things, but that's a whole nother topic for a whole nother day regarding some of the other games. But overall, I think you just won't get the same experience playing any other card game.
I definitely would agree with that sentiment because as much as I love Ryan Miller as a designer, I look at Lorcana, just I know that's a huge topic right now is just Lorcana because that's the next big TCG that has came out, and I think that game is going to stick around for a bit. Just because Disney money is a lot of money. But as much as I love Ryan Miller, who led the design charge on Chrono Clash, which led to the birth of Digimon, and he worked on Lorcana, just like Richard Garfield, not everything is going to be super great all the time, and I think Lorcana is actually really boring as a game, and every time I look at a different card game, I'm like, I just want to play Digimon. Like, that's a good thought process to have. Like, I look at Magic, and I was just like, do I want to play Magic Commander? And then I look across the table, see my brothers playing it, and like I could see they're not having as much fun as when they have Digimon when all cylinders are firing. Because like there's just a magical stopping point in a lot of the other games where it's just like, and the game is now over. Digimon at least has like a nice progression to it. Instead of it just coming out of nowhere and just explosions happen and then the game just finishes in a whimper, and it's just like, cool, that was great. So
I think that's just like something with like recent Bandai card games, hence like Digimon and then One Piece. Because I think those two games are just infinitely better than most of the other ones.
I
I don't
think
even think it's close.
yeah, I think Bandai as a whole, with each passing card game, they're supposedly getting better and better. I say supposedly because Battle Spirits doesn't look like it's in a super hot position, and then there's the Dragon Ball drama between Fusion World and Masters, and I think Masters is going to end up dying as a result of Fusion World, even though they said that they're going to support it, but that being one of their like more recent TCGs, like the first string of the first one of this most recent string, it's definitely their weakest, and it's overly complicated for like borderline no reason, and that game is so unapproachable, it's not even funny. The cards are bland and boring, and I could go on and on and on why I don't like it, but I think because of that, there was still some good out of what was there that One Piece adopted. And same thing with Digimon. There was a lot of good DNA that was in Digimon that One Piece has used, and some people find One Piece to be more appealing at this point because of that. I still like the DNA that Digimon has, and I still like the uniqueness of it, which is why I'm still here, and this is probably going to be my last TCG, because I don't really see a reason why, at least as of right now, no competitor has even came close to how I feel about Digimon, not only just from the IP, but from a game design standpoint.
Fair enough. I don't know if this definitely won't be my last because I'm very much enjoying One Piece, and I don't know, maybe eventually one will come up that I'll enjoy more, but at the current moment, it doesn't look like I'll be playing anything else besides One Piece and Digimon. So I guess Bandai card games will have me sucked in for a while.
But on that note, I think this was definitely a good riveting topic on just game design in general. I always love these types of topics. So I want to thank everyone for listening. And if you enjoyed this episode, please, please, please support the podcast and the various channels that the podcast is on, and share it with others on social media, so that way we could try to spread it around. Also, leaving a rating, review, like, follow, subscribe. That also helps as well, on top of just all the other general social media stuff that I already mentioned. And I want to thank everyone again for listening, and we will see you in the next episode.